Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. Inside the theories surrounding our ancient history, within the deconstructed narratives, through the thinly laid veil that covers the true nature of everything, it appears that the responsibility of academia is not to find out the truth per se, but rather to weed out anything that could be seen as unexplainable. For even the most complex portions of history, those turning points in the trajectory of mankind, have been written with smooth edges, meaning there's very little on the surface that appears to be worth a deeper dive. And yet, isn't that the very nature of a narrative itself? To create an air of plausible deniability and conclusiveness. That is why, on this channel, I like to not only address the current narrative with an almost childlike sense of wonder, but I also strongly believe that locating, utilizing, and examining the oldest photographs is of the utmost importance, for those images are the best windows that we have into the true nature of the society that came before us. Today, we will look at photographic albums first released in 1873, showcasing images dated from roughly 1870 through 1873. And these photographs will be of the cultural region and territorial collective historically known as Alsace. Before getting into the current narrative briefly, it's worth note, as you will see in these photographs, that we have some of the most remarkable defensive architecture ever photographed in the 1800s. For reference, many of these images are considered to be the first photographs of their respective subject matter, and a large portion of this collection will be dedicated to castles, nearly all of them appearing in ruins, with a handful of them actually being rock castles. These castles were built entirely into and out of large mountain ridges. Something else worth note in these images is the absolutely astounding age on some of the structures we are looking at. Not only do we have a multitude of large fortifications and ruins, once sprawling castles that were founded on steep cliffs, but you'll also come to notice that much of this particular region in what is today France appears to have been developed at one point or another. Trekking through the forest, you will see paved roads, paths appearing hundreds of years old, and all of it is lined with stone. Many of the towns and cities we will look at contain the ruins of large fortified defensive structures, and many times you can actually see where the old structure began to be stripped away to supply the stones for the newer buildings. This goes hand in hand with the narrative regarding rock castles and other unexplainable fortifications, which I discussed in a video just a few weeks ago. Rock castles, according to the mainstream narrative, did not survive until modern times, mainly because they were said to have become the first stone quarries in their respective regions. We're literally told people came upon and founded these structures, in the sense of literally finding them out in nature, whether purposefully or by accident, and then they quite literally tore down hundreds of these fortifications only to reuse the stones to rebuild the town around them. Does that make sense? The history of Alsace is no different. The question becomes, how old are these superstructures truly? How were they created? And why was there a clamoring during the mid-1800s to seemingly conceal or demolish as many of the old world structures as possible, put forth under the auspices of a revolution? The images today come to us courtesy of photographer Adolphe Braun. Again, I'm going to keep this narrative as brief as possible, using it to simply point out the contrast between the photographs and the narrative. So take this current narrative with a grain of salt. The region of Alsace was occupied roughly 650,000 years ago. By 250,000 years ago, Neanderthals established a strong presence in the area, with their main congregation being just west of Strasbourg. By 35,000 years ago, evidence of early modern humans appears in Alsace. We're told that humans of this time period generally lived inside the caves and left behind tools such as stone scrapers, chisels, projectiles, and by roughly 13,000 BC, evidence of homes. By 5,500 BC, the society of Alsace becomes more closely aligned with the primitive societies that were also found in Bavaria. This appears to coincide with the introduction or establishment of advanced farming cultures in this region. What's really interesting here is how the early humans built mounds and lived in longhouses founded on top of them, raising crops and animals, including cow, sheep, and pigs. This lifestyle is almost an exact mirror of indigenous lifestyles, even down to the longhouses that were found in America some 6,000 years later. Just food for thought. By 2000 BC, nearly every major town or settlement was being founded on top of a mound or tell, usually a man-made hill used for defense. These hilltop sites in Alsace would be accompanied by rudimentary fortified walls and castles, and this time period also saw the widespread usage of bronze. Just as the first culture emerged that was building what we may see as castles, these fortifications on high elevations, whether those elevations were things like man-made tells or they were different mountain ridges and different hills that were quite literally built into creating things like the earliest form of the rock castle, we can also look at an even more mysterious group that emerged into this region, and that was the bell beaker culture. Now, many of the bell beaker artifacts have been found in caves and in layers that are considered to be partially, if not completely, underground, seemingly indicating that the bell beaker culture did not create their fortifications on high elevations, but rather chose to be more hidden within the earth itself. And that's something interesting as we look into the photographs of these rock castles. But what really signifies the bell beaker culture were the bell beakers, these massive bell-shaped artifacts that were found all throughout the landscapes that were occupied by this group. Scientists and historians today will tell us that these massive bells were used to transport water, but we can theorize and we can hypothesize many different other things that these massive bells could have been used for. However, as the bell beaker culture emerged, it was almost as quickly defeated by a second wave of mound or tumulus building culture, who built their towns on high elevations. The second wave was considered to be entirely Proto-Indo-European, and by roughly 1000 BC, the majority of the region had interconnected and spoke an early form of Celtic dialect. Yet, just as quickly, these mound builders were replaced by the Urnfield culture, a mysterious group who cremated and then buried those who had passed in massive urns, grouped together and then buried deep underground. And yet, that history also goes completely dormant with the arrival of Roman forces and the coming of the Iron Age. From 800 BC onward, under Roman influence, a wealthy aristocratic upper class formed in Alsace, who began to occupy the old fortified ruins left on the mounds. Alsace became the home and center for Celtic power and production, and by the 1st century AD, the region was filled with massive fortified towns, considered to be some of the largest fortified settlements in this area during Roman times. Yet the founding of these castles also seemed to coincide with the arrival of Germanic tribes to Alsace. We're told the region was slowly but steadily integrated into Rome during the Gallic Wars, with this being finalized as Germanic people entered the region, and the Celtic tribes are said to have actually turned to Rome for assistance. We're told Julius Caesar himself arrived to Alsace, and when negotiations broke down with the Germanic tribes, he routed them completing Rome's capture of this region. Alsace was then made part of the Roman province Germania Superior, with Strasbourg, known as Argentoratum, as the largest and most important city. By 355 AD, the Alemanni emerged as the leading Germanic tribe of Europe, and they quickly began capturing lands in Alsace, culminating in the capture of Strasbourg. By 357, Roman forces recaptured the territory. However, in 406, which is generally considered the time of the crossing of the Rhine, a conglomerate of major Germanic tribes entered Alsace, capturing the landscape. Rome never regained the territory. We're told the main rival to the Alemanni were the Franks to the north. In 496, Clovis and the Franks defeated the Alemanni and incorporated Alsace into the Frankish kingdom of Austrasia. Again, read between the lines, but under Clovis's successors, the majority of Alsace was Christianized, and nearly all of the ancient and ruined strongholds were converted to Frankish castles. We're then told from roughly 800 onward, Alsace repeatedly changed hands, as was a common practice for feudal kingdoms under rule of the Holy Roman Empire. Under the Hohenstaufen emperors, Alsace grew to great prosperity, and by 1262, Strasbourg, which was easily the most important city in the region, was made a free imperial city of the Holy Roman Empire. We're told Strasbourg was the political center for much of the Holy Roman Empire, as it was the direct port linking Germany, France, Switzerland, the Netherlands, England, Scandinavia, and the Far East. However, by the 1300s, and with the outbreak of the Little Ice Age and the Black Plague, Alsace was completely reduced. These events were linked directly at the time to the Jewish population. Many believe the plague had been brought to the city with the arrival of certain merchants who afterwards began purchasing up nearly all of the empty property in the city. Oddly, we see a similar narrative in other major cities during the Black Plague. The Jewish population of Alsace was removed, and following a great earthquake which ruined the region in 1356, a great time of prosperity returned to the region under Habsburg control, and this occurred during the Renaissance. This prosperity remained until roughly 1639, when the Habsburgs threatened to overtake multiple French lands, leading to a conflict. Realizing the fragility of their claim, the Habsburgs were said to have eventually sold most of Alsace to France in 1646, which was officially recognized by the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. The German language remained the dominant language of the region, and unlike other parts of France, Alsace retained complete religious freedom. The year 1789 brought the French Revolution, and with it, the First Division of Alsace. After the storming of the Bastille, the Strasbourg City Hall was also stormed, officially putting an end to the feudal system in the area. The national anthem of France was also composed in Strasbourg at this time. Again, read between the lines, but we're told from 1790 through 1803, many fled Alsace, fearing invasion by Austrian and Prussian forces during the Revolution, leaving thousands of wealthy homes and entire towns vacant. As tensions cooled, we're told the French attempted to return to their abandoned cities. However, they found that nearly all of them had been occupied by Russian immigrants. Tartarians had flooded France. Or is that just plausible deniability? After Napoleon's defeat, Alsace was occupied by these foreign troops until at least 1818, and many of them settled there long term. Again, what does any of this mean? We're told with the influx of Tartarian or Russian people to Alsace, the population grew rapidly, from roughly 800,000 people in 1814 to 914,000 people in 1830, and to over 1 million people in 1846. This influx of people, however, was said to have ruined the landscape and left much of the region of Alsace in dilapidated conditions. Again, I do not have answers here, but this influx of people from Tartaria or Russia was also said to be largely Jewish. This was the first major return of Jews to Alsace in over 300 years. By 1831, the state of France began paying all salaries of rabbis. The conditions of Alsace continued to worsen through 1848, leading to the Revolution of 1848. However, Alsace was not said to have returned to prosperity until roughly 1871 and the end of the Franco-Prussian War, when Alsace was realigned as a German landscape. As we've discussed before, this war was a landslide victory for the Prussian Germanic forces, mostly due to their usage of unstoppable Krupp steel technology. After World War I, it was made illegal to speak German in Alsace, and campaigns were put forth to eliminate German influence completely from the region. But these campaigns failed. Today, the Alsace region has nearly 2 million residents, with an intricate blend of French and German influence, and a majority of the most important European institutions in German and French-speaking lands exist in Alsace, including the Congress of Vienna, European Coal and Steel Community, which later became the European Union, and the European Scientific Foundation. With that, we have the history of Alsace. Now, this region obviously was important to both French and German history, but beyond that, we can tie this back to even more questionable occurrences throughout our historical timeline. This is one of the few narratives that we have that does have a lot of holes within it, that we have more questions that we can pose that really are not answered with the information that we have available to us. But beyond all of that, the photographs here are incredible. This was some of the finest architecture that I have seen in the 19th century, architecture that was apparently being photographed for the first time. But as you can see in nearly every single castle, especially the rock castles, this architecture is absolutely ancient. It could have been here hundreds, if not thousands of years, and most of it is being tied back to Roman times, being tied back to the Frankish kings. However, we also have evidence of even earlier occupation of this land, and we have a narrative that seems to point fingers in basically every direction, where we don't exactly know who founded these locations, who built the very foundations that these cities and towns and settlements were being built on top of, and could all of this trace back to one unified history, one unified culture that appeared to arrive here before recorded history began.